specifically on this aspect of the NEP, the teaching of instruction till class 5 being in one's mother tongue, something that the Sangh Parivar has constantly insisted upon in the past. Can that set India on an unlimited path of growth and wealth creation?
So, Sarah, let me just first say, this is not an aspect that I covered in my book. Nevertheless, yes, I'll give you my view on it. First of all, I don't like this to be the whole issue to be phrased in terms of RSS versus non-RSS, because there is a large body of academic literature, in fact, on whether children learn better when taught in their mother tongue versus being taught in a different language.
Defenders of it do point that out.
So let's phrase the question in those terms rather than RSS versus non-RSS. I think that convolutes the whole conversation, in my opinion. So as far as I'm personally concerned, I went to a Hindi school, and I'm glad that I did, because it sort of grounded me a lot better into India, and eventually, I needed to learn English, which I did once I, got to 9th grade or so, and I picked up better in college. Now, in terms of the policy here, I see a bit of a conflict between what may be an overall public country interest versus an individual interest, because we have already created a system in which there is a premium on learning English language. So, as an individual, clearly, I think parents would like their children to learn English. As a nation, do children actually learn better in vernacular? I think there's a lot of evidence, in my own personal experience, I would say as well, in that direction. So that's the sort of conflict that arises in this. I don't think it's going to be easy in any way to switch today, because the history matters. And given the current history, it seems to me that it's going to be very difficult for any government to actually change this. Also,
Mr. Panagarya,
this last point.
Go ahead, sir.
Just one last point, that this is just a broad policy. The government is definitely not bound by this. Ultimately, the issue will be what the legislation that implements the policy looks like.
Okay, but you brought up your own personal example. I'm glad you did, because clearly you've said it's helped you. You started learning English in class 9. You built on it yourself, but you also said it gave you good grounding in India. But professionally, Mr. Panagarya, you've been a chief economist at the Asian Development Bank. Then you worked at the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO. These are all international fora. So you've spent most of your professional life abroad. Would students brought up in an education policy that doesn't focus on English maybe until class 8 or 9 like you did, be able to follow the professional career path you have taken if that's their aspiration?
Well, I think not everyone actually follows that path, and those who want to follow that path can do it. I mean, look, if I did it,
you are proof of that.
Obviously, there is a way to do it. And I should correct myself. I think, I probably started learning in school. English got introduced in the 6th grade, perhaps. Okay. But the medium of instruction, even in college, actually had remained Hindi, except that, personally, I switched to English. So it certainly can be done. I mean, look, my best examples, I think, of are countries like South Korea, China. They all do it in their own languages. And where they need to learn English, they learn it. Now, I remember in the 1980s when the students from China came to the United States, the English was extremely poor. That has completely changed now. Now, the Chinese students that come in, they have fluent English. Chinese students from South Korea, the students from South Korea, they all do well.
So then then would Indian students be at a disadvantage? But thank you, Dr. Panagarya. You've kick-started this conversation. Thank you for your time joining us today from New York. All right, let's bring in Shivam Vij, journalist, advocate, Nandita Rao, Chandra B. Sharma, former chairman of the National Open University. Shivam Vij, to you first. You heard Mr. Panagarya, but you've written an article where you say the mother tongue fanatics are keeping India a poor, backward country. Why do you say that?
Well, I think the evidence is clear. A lot of people are saying that there's a lot of evidence that children learn better in their mother tongue, but just look around us. The successful people in various fields are all people who went to English medium schools. There is a reason why most of India, most parents want to send their children to English medium schools if they can afford it. It's because everybody can see that the successful people in India are people who went to English medium schools. I think examples like those of Dr. Banagria, you'll find them many, but they are in a minority. They are the exception who prove the rule. The rule in India is that people who go to English medium schools have access to global professions, a global elite, but even within India, if you look at our medical colleges, our engineering colleges, students who come from a non-English medium background actually have a very difficult time coping up. Sadly, if you look at the suicides that take place in our engineering and medical colleges, especially of SC/ST students, you will find that they invariably went to non-English medium schools. So for modern professions, for global professions, for global mobility, for IT, for all kinds of things, in India you need English. Of course, you give the examples. People give the examples of Japan, Germany, even China now, Italy, France, all kinds of countries that have done well despite having their own languages, their own mother tongues as the medium of instruction. But that has not worked in India. There is clearly a language divide which we need to accept and recognize. And if students learn better in their mother tongue, then how is it that students who went to English medium schools are doing much better in India? And India is dominated by people who went to English medium schools.
Mr. Chand, Professor Sharma, you are disagreeing. I see you shaking your head vociferously. But, Professor Panagria pointed out that now Chinese students, by the time they reach the US, they know the English, they're learning their English. Shivam Vij points that out. We've had this advantage when it comes to the IT sector. Why would we want to give that advantage up?
Sarah, I completely disagree with the co-panelist who was speaking in favor of English. As a linguist, I'll say all those who study in mother tongue tend to do better in life. And up to the age of, say, about 8, 9, we have the capacity, as Chomsky also says, the innate capacity to learn multiple languages together. Now, we are not realizing the fact that we push out millions of students in India out of school because we have a major language of the region or English as the medium of instruction in the initial years. Don't forget those children who speak Khadiya, Kho, Santhali, Mundari, Maithili, Bhojpuri are pushed out of school because they are put in a class where the language is Hindi. Let us not make it an English, Tamil, Hindi divide at the moment. The policy is brilliant in its exposure to language policy. I would very strongly insist that if children are given initial years education, what the policy says from 3 years to 8 years in mother tongue, millions of students who drop out of school because they don't understand anything in class 1 because the medium of instruction, as we understand, is only 22 languages of the 8th schedule. And these are not languages of most of the Indians. Even in Tamil Nadu, all children do not speak Tamil. They have a different dialect of Tamil in which the initial years must be taught. I am reminded of the Bharatvani project that Honorable Minister Smriti Irani started and said we must have initial year education in mother tongue, and I can clearly see that major portion of the policy, section 1 and 2 of the school education is dominated by the theme of retaining children.
Okay.
If you do
Shivam,
not
quick
provide them
response. I want to bring
education
in
in mother
Nandita Rao.
tongue, they will drop out. And don't forget, as Mr. Panigariya has said, we are most of us who are doing well in life, are able to express ourselves in English, are not from families which had English as their language. We learned it very late in life. I started learning English at about class 6 or 7.
Shivam, quick response.
I have many things to say, but I'll keep it short. Sir meant Santhali language. I would like to point out that Santhali's mother tongue is not Hindi. So why should they be taught in Hindi and not in Santhali? if mother tongue is the idea, and if they're taught in Santhali, what career prospects await them?
Well, okay, let me also bring in Nandita. Mr. Chandra, you raised that point about the defenders of this policy, Nandita, say that point to research that shows that children learn best in one's mother tongue. But as Shivan points out, whose mother tongue is it anyway? What about children who are born of mixed backgrounds? Nandita Rao, your parents are from different states. What was your home language as the new NEP describes it? You studied in Hindi medium school until class 5, I think. Where do you stand on this?
So I completely disagree with all the speakers today, because first of all, I feel this mother tongue education system is okay in unilingual countries like Europe, but in a diverse country like ours, which is multilingual, and yet we have a lot of intra-country migration. That is the beauty of our country. People from the south live in the north. People from the north live in the south. Indians from across the country marry each other, and we have unity in diversity. So to say that, each state, it will be mandatory to, study in your mother tongue. But what is our mother tongue? For most Indians, in a way, English is our mother tongue. Because even people from Hindi-speaking or Tamil-speaking families, when they go to another state, the only language in which we communicate with each other is English. And I think English is no longer a colonial language because it's become the global language. Even the French, the Germans, and the Chinese are learning English. So I think if we have to fight colonization, we have to fight it at a deeper level. And I'll come to that. That's another very major problem with the new economic policy, that they're selling out on higher education to USA, where India is actually a world leader. But coming back to primary education, so my mother tongue or my home language was English because my mother was Punjabi and my father was Andhra. But I went to a Hindi medium school till class 5, Sardar Patel Vidyalaya, and I learnt Hindi, which I think is an advantage. I read, write, and speak Hindi like a UPite or a native Hindi speaker, because at that age you can pick up a language. So when I came to class 6, because I came from an English-speaking family, for me the transition was very smooth. Okay. But for a lot of my classmates, and remember, Sardar Patel was a public school where people from the middle and upper middle class studied. Yeah. But yet, the children who were from Hindi-speaking families, middle school, their self-confidence dropped, their interest in studies dropped because suddenly there was a switch to English. So, I think where, government servants, your child is studying everything, including maths and Tamil, and suddenly you're posted in Rajasthan. So, I think we have to get over this policy, whatever form of jingoism it brings up in people. But this is not new, it's a failed policy.
Okay, but Mr. Sharma says it's an excellent policy, but I want to see, is it really practical on the ground? Alinda Merrie joins us from Eduki in Kerala, and you tweeted that this will basically encourage or force people to only stay and work in their home states, and women particularly you think will be affected, which is something that Nandita has touched upon, that it will force people to work and stay in their home states. What do you mean by that? How is that?
Yes, I would like to talk with an example. Suppose I am a person living in Kerala and I have a kid, and this particular kid is being educated in Malayalam, her primary schooling. And suppose I get a transfer to, say, Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu, and I have to switch from Kerala to Maharashtra, and my child, if she comes along with me, she will be educated in Marathi or Tamil later on. So suppose we stick with Marathi. My child was studying in Malayalam until, say, class 3 or 4, and suddenly she switches to what? Marathi, an altogether new language. And again, this is not about studying a particular language. This is about studying in a particular language. So there are 4 major concerns that I have with this. First thing is, how will this affect the migration and employment within the country?
Important questions. I'm glad you raised it up and you've joined us as a student. So the voice of a student, voice of a woman, also I think then the onus would fall on women as mothers to then focus on the, making sure the children catch up and what does this mean for their professional careers. But again, I want to talk about how practical this is on the ground. So let's go across to Anand Kumar, well known, needs no introduction, founder of the Super 30 program. He's a mathematics educator, best known for the Super 30 program run out of Bihar, which coaches underprivileged students of the for IIT and JEE. And Mr. Kumar, सब लोग यहाँ पे कह रहे हैं कि research shows that children learn best in one's mother tongue. But mother tongue क्या होगा? आपके experience में when you get these students from underprivileged backgrounds, would it be better for them to be educated in English earlier or should it come later? And do we have teachers? Teachers मिल सकते हैं to teach English, math, physics, chemistry in Hindi or whatever the mother tongue is?
जी बहुत ध्यान से देखा जाए तो जितनी बातें मैंने सुनी उसके आधार पर बताऊं कि हमारे देश में बहुत जमाने से शिक्षा एजुकेशन 2 लेयर पर है। पहले स्तर पर, पहले स्टैंडर्ड पर जो अमीर बच्चे हैं वो इंग्लिश मीडियम के स्कूल से पढ़ते हैं, अच्छा करते हैं, मैनेजमेंट स्कूल में पढ़ते हैं, और दूसरा मेरा जो अंडर प्रिविलेज परिवार का बच्चा है उसके पास सुविधाएं नहीं, स्कूल नहीं जाते हैं। तो शिक्षा जो है वो अमीरों के चौखट की गुलाम बन गई है। अब जो न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी लाया गया है, इस पॉलिसी के तहत जो छोटे छोटे अंडर प्रिविलेज घर के बच्चे उनको डेफिनेटली फायदा होगा, क्योंकि मैं ये अपने अनुभव के, अपने एक्सपीरियंस के आधार पर बता रहा हूँ। उनको स्कूल जाने में अच्छा लगेगा, स्कूल में जो बातें होंगी वो सुनने में अच्छा लगेगा और बातें समझ में भी आएंगी, और जो एजुकेशन के प्रति हवा है, डर है, वो खत्म होगा। जहां तक बात ही हमारे पहले के जो स्पीकर्स हैं, वक्ताओं ने बोला कि उनको बाद में प्रॉब्लम हो गया, ऐसा नहीं। चाहे कुली के बच्चे हो, ऑटो ड्राइवर के बच्चे हो, जो कि अपने हिंदी में पढ़ते हैं, मामूली लैंग्वेज में भी, अपने घरेलू भाषा में भी पढ़ के बातचीत करके आते हैं। तो जहां तक आपने पूछा पढ़ाने की बात, तो हम लोग राइटिंग इंग्लिश में करते हैं और बोलते हिंदी में। धीरे 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 बच्चा जब IIT में जाता है तो वहां बहुत कुछ सीखता है। और आज सुपर 30 का बच्चा जिसको एक वर्ड ठीक से इंग्लिश नहीं आता था, अमेरिका, इंग्लैंड, जापान अच्छे जगह पर काम कर रहा है। अगर वैसे बच्चों को शुरू से रीजनल लैंग्वेज में पढ़ने का मौका मिलेगा तो डेफिनेटली वो अच्छा करेगा।
Thank you, Anand Kumar ji, for the work that you've been doing all these years. But I want to, as we close up, the fact is that we need a unifying language. As Nandita pointed out, we're a country with many states, many languages. A unified language of choice across Indian states for the private sector, for the government sector in states like Tamil Nadu. Markets can't operate if there's no unified language. So who will decide what that unified language will be? Mr. Saravanan of the DMK's spokesperson, what will that language be?
See,
will it be Hindi?
This is a well settled question. No, it can never be Hindi. See, it is already a well settled question. When the constitutional assembly, the Constituent Assembly, when it met, they decided that they may make Hindi as the national language. But they said, no, nothing doing, it can't be done. They said English and Hindi will be the official language, and English is the perfect unifying language, because it levels the field for everybody. It is neutral for me, it is neutral for someone from Uttar Pradesh, it is neutral from someone from West Bengal. But when you make Hindi as the unifying language, it gives an undue advantage for people who speak Hindi and people who are not native speakers of Hindi. So Hindi can never be accepted as a unifying language. It will create a class of citizens, a first class citizens who speak Hindi and a second class citizens who does not speak Hindi. So we will never accept that, and we have had Hindi agitations against imposition of Hindi. When you are speaking of Hindi as a unifying language, then it means you are trying to impose Hindi on people who do not want to study Hindi.
All right, so that's of course an issue the government is going to have to deal with going forward. But Mr. Chandraban, word to you and then closing to Shivam Vij. Many political observers, when they talk about this, have pointed out that while the government is pushing for this, most of senior ministers send their children for higher education abroad. Now, you know, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad had tweeted a picture of his child going off to study in Boston University. I think in the end, it's about a parent's aspiration. And if this parent wants their child to study English and take a certain path, why is it that only certain parents can enjoy that moment of pride and joy of sending their children off to study abroad and not others?
See, first of all, I'll say 3% of Indians speak English. And when we support English, are we supporting only those 3% of the population which knows English and which will succeed if English is made the language? 1. 2. We have been quoting that more than 20 million children are pushed out. There are 2 crore children out of school today because they could not cope with the language of school in the initial years. What we are talking of and what this policy talks of is how to retain these children who come from the poor families.
All right, Shivam, which closing argument to you?
Definitely not poor. I know he's my friend and we have studied together. And when we...
All right, Mr. Sharma, I'm out of time. Let me give Shivam also some time. Closing argument.
Because of lack of infrastructure, because of caste discrimination, not because of English, because of bad teachers.
Correct. That's one point. Shivam, closing argument.
Teachers, section 5 of the policy.
Let's have a coherent closing argument. Shivam, please go ahead.
It has been already said in the policy.
So your economic policy is to be the call center of the world, and then you say that Hindi-speaking children should learn English and an American accent to work in call centers. So your education policy is going left and your economic policy is going right.
Okay, closing argument. I'm out of time. We will debate this, I'm sure, further on other shows too. Shivam Vij, go ahead.
Teen children, because
I think you know the way Mr. Sharma is not letting me speak is a good example of how the Hindi walas and the language wala just want to drown out everybody else with their political self-righteousness. The fact of the matter is that these students leave school because they are taught in Shuddh Hindi, which is not their mother tongue. It is some artificial new language created by the Raj Bhasha Committee, super Sanskritized. It is not the language that people speak in their homes, and that is why they've ruined both.
Well, we hope what we've tried and what we aspire to do on the show is try and bring our viewers all the various points of view on this topic. We hope we've done that tonight, and you can hear all the various points of view on our panel tonight. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining us on We the People, a show where we believe it's important to speak up, but it's also important to listen. Thank you all. Good night.